Hey, warriors. So, I want to talk about love today. And I'm going to say most people, and I'm not saying all, okay? So, don't anybody bite my head off. But most people don't love unconditionally, you know? They love with invisible conditions they're not realizing are there, I guess is how I'm trying to say this. And it's not a judgment, okay? It's a realization that I came to, for myself during my awakening process. Because for a long time, I thought that loving somebody, unconditionally meant, loving them no matter what, you know, no matter what they did, no matter how they made you feel, no matter if they hurt you, no matter if they drained you, no matter how much you suffered, you know. Um, and I thought that that made me strong, you know, but I realized something during this awakening process, that wasn't unconditional love, it was attachment, it was trauma, it was survival. And there's a huge difference. You know what I'm saying? Dude, sorry, excuse me for 1 second. My pathos is coming across my damn table and it's got like, I don't know, 15 of these. They're just everywhere. I'm like all wrapped up in pathos. Okay. Anyways, um, but there is a difference, a big difference. And when I was healed, a lot of my love was tied to what someone did for me, I guess is how I'm trying to say this. How they made me feel about myself, how they made me feel safe, how they made me feel, enough, how they, distracted me, I guess, from my own pain. Um, and it wasn't, I'm not saying it was a fake love, you know what I mean? Um, it was a real love. It was just wounded love, I guess we'll call it. Um, and wounded love, says things like, I need you, or don't leave me, I don't know who I am without you, you complete me. Most people think that's romantic. You see what I'm saying? But it's actually a wound speaking. Um, and I started, and as I started healing, something huge changed in me. Because for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I needed anyone to survive. You know, um, and that's huge because I'm loyal. The people that I love, I'm loyal, and I love them, and they can depend on their love. But what surprised me, the love didn't disappear. You know what I'm saying? It actually became, more pure. It became more cleaner, softer, stronger, more free. And so it's like I didn't stop loving anybody. Do you know what I mean? I just stopped needing them. Am I explaining this right? Um, and that is when, like, I guess I understood what unconditional love actually is. You know, um, unconditional love doesn't say you're mine. It says you're free, right? Unconditional love doesn't beg you to stay. It wants you to be happy even if that happiness is somewhere else, right? Um, it doesn't cling, it doesn't manipulate, it doesn't guilt, it doesn't control, it just exists. I don't know. I hope I'm explaining this correctly. I just, you know, it's love. I guess it's like love without fear attached to it. You know how you grow up and people say, oh, well, you can't love anybody until you loved yourself. And I always thought, how fucking selfish of a thing to say. You should always love everybody more than you love yourself. As you start healing, you know, you realize when you're healed and you're not projecting any of those insecurities or whatever the case might be, in my case, it was insecurities because, my parents left, and that always made me feel like everybody was going to leave. You know what I mean? And then you start loving people for reasons that, you know, isn't good to love somebody for. But you know, a lot of people confuse, attachment, I guess, with loyalty. I know I did. You know what I mean? Um, I don't know. I'm a loss for words now. But, like codependency with devotion, I guess, those kinds of things. But if your love, if your love is fueled by fear, I hope I don't sound like I'm rambling. But anyway, if it's fueled by, fear, if it needs to, controlled, I guess, to feel safe, or even if it collapses when the other person pulls away, that's not unconditional love, right? That's that's an open wound trying to attach, to another open wound, right? Because the most loving thing you can do is become whole on your own. That's the higher form of love. And I used to think that I loved my husband purely, and I do with all my heart. But now I can admit, parts of that love were based on what he provided emotionally. You know, how he stabilized my world, how he made me feel less alone. And when I healed, I realized I would still love him even if he gave me none of these things. Right? Because now my love comes from who I am, not from what I need. And that changes everything. It really does. This is, sovereign love. So let me ask you something, and I want you to be honest with yourself, not me. Okay? If the people you love suddenly changed, if they could no longer, I guess, give you what what they give you now, would you still love them? Or are you loving, the wound they soothe in you? Answering that, doesn't make you bad, right? It makes you conscious, and conscious is healing. A lot of people, and I was too, are terrified to heal because they're afraid love will disappear. you know but the truth is when wounds go away, love remains, you know? Only the illusion fades, I guess. You know what I'm saying? Real love isn't desperate. It isn't loud, it isn't dramatic. It's peaceful and steady and safe and free. You know, it doesn't trap. It blesses. Um I don't know. This is the level, so many of you are stepping into right now. You're learning the difference between need and love, trauma and connection, identity and attachment, ego and soul, you know, um, and that can feel confusing, you know, um, even scary at first, but I promise you, you're not losing love. You're fucking purifying it, dude. Um, I don't know how else to say it. It's a freaking purification, you know. Um, Real unconditional love, doesn't disappear because you become whole. You know, it actually gets stronger, like I said, because then you don't love from fear. You're loving from truth. You know, and that's the highest vibration there is, legends. I love you.